right. Hello, everybody. I don't see many heads, so hopefully you're able to hear me fine, right? Okay. My name is Aditi Pendse. I'm a senior product manager on Core, and I manage Android and apps. And I'm here to talk about securing corporate information with Google. Now, where do we start? I guess I'm going to start with why Google. Why is Google getting involved in all this? Because of Android for Work. So you guys must be aware of Android for Work. It's a program by Google in which you can have much more secure access. Basically the access is at the OS level. You get a lot more lockdowns, a lot more control over the configs, what you can do, which users you add, what apps you can deploy, and all of that is supported by Google. So it's kind of like the places, the hooks which Google has, you cannot get that at the app layer. So it's the way to go if you have Android devices. Essentially, it's the path forward. Now, what happens? So for Android for Work, you need to set it up. You need to set it up so that it works in your enterprise. So there are certain steps to set it up. I'm going to go over very quickly on that, but basically this session I'm focusing on what information you are sharing with Google, why is it important, and what are some of the alternatives you can do if you're not comfortable with certain approach. I know that when Google came in with Android for Work, and when they talked about, hey, now you have to share your users, many of you thought, oh, winter is coming. But I'm going to go over it and show you that how it's not that scary as it looks. So sharing corporate data. So we know that cloud solutions require a kind of a relationship. When we look at Windows with Azure Active, you still need to have a relationship with Microsoft here. Same with iTunes, like with Apple, you need to have an iTunes account at a corporate level. Even with device-based VPP, you still need to have an iTunes account, which is a corporate level. So you need to establish that kind of a relationship between the provider, in this case, EMM, and your domain. So that's what Android for Work is doing. It's a cloud-based solution. Google wants to know that this particular domain is owned by you, and you are authorizing, in this case, MobileIron or any other EMM provider, to have the secure, a triangle of relationship, which Google wants to know about. So that's what we do when we set up Android for Work to start with. So why there is so much concern with Google? We are used to doing that with other solutions, right? So I'm going to cover what is Android for Work very quickly. I'm going to focus on how do you bind your domain, and especially on how do you share your users, which is where I guess most of the concerns lies around. So what is Android for Work very quickly? With Android for Work, you need to, currently at present as it stands, is you need to own a domain. You need to verify it for Google that you own that domain, and you need to bind your domain with Google. What does bind your domain mean? Basically, you need to tell Google that, hey, I am the EMM provider for this particular company, and for this domain, and I'm going to run commands on behalf of this domain. So there's this relationship which needs to be established. There are some steps to do that. It's a one-time setup, and everything is documented. So you can follow the core guides, core setup guides, and cloud setup guides, and you can easily set it up. So basically, you bind your domain, you configure your apps, you upload your users, and you enroll your client. It's as simple as that, 4-step process to set up Android for Work. Now, binding your domain, what is involved in that? You need to create a domain. You can create a domain with Google, you can create a domain with GoDaddy, you can create anywhere, essentially. But you just need to prove to Google that you own that domain. And you can do that by, using a text record. There are some other ways to do it, but this is the simplest, essentially, to prove that you own the domain. It's as simple as when you register to a site and then you get an email to confirm your registration. So it's pretty simple as that. Now the next step is you need to add users to this particular domain. I'm showing an example of how you add users manually. I'm going to talk about how do you automatically add using GATS, but I'm showing this example so that you understand how do you add a user and how do you add domains, for that. So you can add a user here, you can add multiple users. You see miacme.com is a domain which I use to register the users. Let's dwell deeper into it. Actually, sorry, let's take a step back. Let's say we just set up one user with one domain. Now we go back to core and we try to set up Android for Work. So here there are a couple of steps. I'm not going to go into the depth of it, but basically you need to know, you see the boxes in red, you need to know the MDM token and the domain name and the JSON file. That everything you'll get, it's a combination of your admin account with Google of that domain, as well as what you get from the security of it. So you fill all that information and you basically bind, when I say bind, you're creating that relationship here, right here. Once you authorize your users, user sync, then this is when you are done with your AFW setup. I'm not going into too much detail of it because this is pretty straightforward. There are like a number of steps, you just follow that and you are set here. Okay, so this is important. Now let's say you are a domain abc.com and you buy another company and that's xyz.com, or you have multiple domains, or you want to use aliases, So how do you do that? Because I just had evalmiacme.com. Now how do I make it much more, flexible in terms of what can I use there, right? So I can go to domains and I can add multiple domains here. So I can click on domains. Now this is my admin console on Google. And I click on add remove domains and I can add another domain here. So I can add xyz.com. Now what that does is, first it gives you, your new domain appears as active on the admin console. And now you look at your user. The user which you added with evalmiacme.com, now you can add it using US1. So basically you can have multiple domains linked to, basically different email addresses for one user essentially. So you can do that very easily. Now sharing your users, very important. That's where the main focus of this session is. So basically you can use GADS, Google Active Directory Sync, which syncs your Active Directory content onto the Google server. You can use, it's used to automatically populate. You must run on a member of your domain. And what's important is that this is required for AFW even if you don't use Google Apps. Why? Because Google needs to know which user, which apps, what access your user has. Now when I say Google needs to know just the basic bare minimum information, which I'm going to share now. So yeah, so what is synced? Don't get scared by this slide. This is talking about what all that can be synced to Google. So if you choose to do, you can sync mailing lists, passwords, user aliases, rooms. There's a bunch of information which you can sync if you want Google to be your main IDP in this case. But at bare minimum, Google requires you to share at least user, which is actually email address of the user with Google. Now, you ask, I don't want to share all this information, what are my chances? What are the alternatives? What can I do? So one thing which we recommend doing is that maybe you can have an IDP. So the next, hopefully it works, okay. So basically, IDP sits between, Google and your, let's say, LDAP in this case. So what happens is that there's a one-way sync of users from IDP to Google. Now this sync is just the user attribute, the email address. Now imagine user is registering to Google. When you must have seen this screen when you're registering to Android for work, where you have to create a work profile, and that's the time when user enters the credentials and is trying to register to Google. Now if you have an IDP set up in your environment, then what happens is that you'll get the user will get an authentication redirect to the IDP. He's not aware of it, but this is all happening behind the scenes. And he gets a window to enter his credentials. Now, this time he's not entering it for Google, but it's actually entering it for the IDP. Now, what IDP does is that generates a token and sends it back to the client. What client does is takes a token, sends it to Google. So there is no direct link between, your user personal, whatever you want to call it, the sensitive information like password and other personal information of the Google. All Google knows is, your email address, the user's email address in this case. So this is what we would recommend. If you are wary about sharing more information, even though the passwords are synced, even when they are synced with, passwords are encrypted even when they are synced with Google. But still, if you have a concern about sharing information with Google, then this is a way, which we recommend. So yeah, it's a short session. So that's all I have to share.